Welcome to this week's edition of The Informed. Joining me this week, Reuben Humphreys, election campaigner, a man who has great interest in environmental issues and community development. He's currently studying his master's in Indigenous archaeology, which makes me very jealous indeed. John Heron, all-round fabulous lawyer, family violence advocate, as well as a victim of crimes advocate. And Mario Beeks, and a #1 award-winning author, join me, Caroline Council, accredited family law specialist. So guys, this week we're talking about the aftermath of COVID and what's happening with the influx of migrants now that our shores are reopened. So we've got the ABS stats that are indicating migration is on the up and up. We have international students returning, maybe not so much to Melbourne and Victoria, but elsewhere in the country. And we also have some holiday makers, again, maybe not back to Victoria, but elsewhere in the country, but they're returning to our shores. This is resulting in more migrants than the big era of 2008 to 2009. So we're set, evidently, to experience one of our biggest two-year population surges in history since a white man invaded our shores, given there are an extra 650 migrants this financial year, and there's a 900,000 jump in the number of residents. We have a budget coming, we have a federal budget coming, and evidently our Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, is tweaking with the forecasts and figures to take into account this huge influx of people to our shores. So with a very tight economy, with us being deeply in debt, how is Australia going to cope with this rush? And is it a good thing, or is it going to place challenges on our resources? So let's kick it off with you, perhaps, John. Do you think this is a good thing, bad thing? Are we ready for it?
No, and no to all of that. Now, let's just get some numbers in perspective. So first of all, let's look at that 600. Now, that's not something that went to the election, okay? So absolutely, if that went to the election, Mr. Albanese wouldn't be there. So polls have consistently said that 85% of Australians and higher are opposed to large-scale immigration. 85% are supportive of control good immigration that's sustainable. So there's that straight away. So there's that. The second thing is the hiding of the numbers within here, right? So they're talking about a raw number, but again, very little detail in drilling down to what they are. So one of the things I saw, like the furphy of skilled migration. So skilled migration within that's about 80,000. Okay. So the rest, the largest cohort's family reunion. Yeah. So it's probably about 300,000 spouse visas. Some of these things have been backlogged, like people trying to get spouses here have not seen them for 3 or 4 years. That's really bad. So that's processing through. Students. So I noticed in a media report this morning that ALP had hidden that they had something like the majority is a cohort of skilled migration workers, temporary workers, and some student visas, etc. So they hide that even within the larger number, yeah. Right? So it's deceptive again. It's like if we're going to Vietnam, they either say yes or no. You can't in Australia. You can't say yes or no. This is a fact of what's happening. So if you ask me about, that's just the numbers, right? So that's all deception. Now, the first thing at the moment that really pops up for me is a complete lack of infrastructure and housing for them. Like that's really like there's all sorts of factors here involved. It's great processing visas for reunions and spouse visas. Really good that they're getting on top of it. But and students, just a reminder, international students are the largest export in Victoria by a country mile. It's like about $15 billion or more. And that's great, that's coming back. much needed for all the places. But the mass of people coming in from an infrastructure perspective, when again I say all around me now, the roads in our area, Caroline, are literally impassable. The major freeways are blocked. They're down to one lane. We have no hospital. We have a 24/7 police station. The schools are absolutely full and nowhere to go for them. I can keep going on. So justice system overwhelmed, police overwhelmed, courts chaos. If you're going to come in and increase population by 10% here very quickly, and the other stat of that, how much out of that, sorry, in population increase for Australia, does anyone have any idea of what the natural birth rate is? Increase?
No.
Yes, it's about 185,000. So you're having 5 new people to every one person born here. Now, I'll leave it there because I can keep going.
No, I find that fascinating, particularly about the lack of infrastructure and the fact that housing is at an all-time crisis for those of us living here as it is. That whole idea that people can't even remain in current rentals, they cannot continue to keep living where they're living because of rent increases. Mario.
Yeah, look, I'm with John right now. I don't want to into these statistics because they're not statistics. I think that decision bringing another 900,000 immigrants, it is very poor because as we can all agree, I'm talking about Sydney. Sydney, half of Sydney, it's empty. There's no shops, there's no retails, there's nothing. You know, I mean, and there's a house crisis as well. You know, I mean, there's another thing. The crime rate is spiking, and that's like we coming from that COVID like as if we are winners. And I don't know how these people going to adjust themselves to the society. I'm talking from my point of view. I come to Australia. Everything was there for me, the unit, the job, everything else, and I found it difficult to adjust myself. So when you have the influx of 900,000 people, and we don't know from what background they're coming, as John says, we don't know, they're coming from Vietnam, they're coming from Croatia, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Who are those people? So this is not a high-skilled migrant the influx of people. It's a people who's coming to Australia, and it's a decision being made that we bring more people, it's going to be good for economy. How they can be good for economy when you have their problems here internally? It's like everybody believing that this is going to kickstart the economy on a larger scale. I doubt that this is a good decision. I think it's a terrible decision. Terrible.
Ruben, in terms of supporting people coming into the country, we haven't had a great track record either in terms of wide arrival to begin with, and we certainly haven't been great at assisting migrants integrate into our community. We have a terrible record, I believe, in relation to refugees. What's your take on open the gates, let them in, and let's just use them to boost the economy?
Well, to give a simple summary, I would suggest that I'm not a fan of the proposal. There is a very strong disconnect between state and federal interests. The federal interest seems to be much more focused on the economy, but they're also responsible for immigration. States are, of course, responsible for all of the development. Now, the states are fans of mass immigration as well, because that helps to drive their economies, but it's not an integrated, carefully considered approach. And it seems to be an excuse for avoiding the hard work of trying to stimulate natural population growth within the Australian community. As we know, economic pressures increase, birth rates go down because it's more and more difficult to afford families and children. And yet at the same time, to keep that bubble of housing and of low wage job growth, the federal economy likes to bring in lots of immigration so as to keep that stimulus going, but that continues to make economic pressures for the rest of the Australian community that much more worse. So we had a brief break during COVID from mass immigration. And I think everybody was starting to breathe a sigh of relief. I certainly felt that around Melbourne, that there was that moment of, gee, the pressure's off a little bit. We could feel just a little bit more roomy, just able to survive. But I can feel the pressure starting to build now, even within the last few weeks. So we need to really think about this and whether we really want it.
There's also that lack of affordability, as you say, in relation to families deciding to have another child or individuals deciding to have a child. If you don't support them in terms of their parenting ambitions, if you don't have, for example, childcare readily available, accessible, affordable childcare, people will make those decisions not to have children. So that in itself, I think, creates an onset of problems, because if you end up, as John said, with 185,000 children being born in Australia, as opposed to, on the figures, potentially a $900,000 jump in numbers, that is also very problematic. John, what's your take on?
Yeah, so that
lack of support
185 was a
family?
net growth, like births
Yeah.
over deaths. So
Yeah.
that's what you talk about. And for an economy to have a child born here and go through the motions is far greater for the economy. The sort of, always I say, we've said this before in the program, that the saving grace and why governments like it, bit of a Ponzi scheme, is that the migrants generally come in to Australia reasonably well heeled.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a saving grace. Right? And of the skilled, I just want to drill down into, give you some examples of that. So in the, as Ruben said, one of the things that where I've been working for many years in the IT industry. So what we noticed in the pandemic is that all of a sudden, a lot of people from the subcontinent had to leave, and they were being used as sweatshop type labor in a lot of the IT industry, and the quality in things was dropping. There were some really good people there, but then all of a sudden what happened is that rates and wages went up in that sector, and demand got soaked up of good people, right? So there was actually a lot of jobs gone, and local people were obtaining these jobs. So now that you're going to have the same situation, but worse, because I believe, because there's so much like lack of information, that it's going to be like you can bring in anyone that earns more than $80,000. Which is going to have shelf companies employing 25 people on 100 grand, and they pay that. That's guaranteed. I'll give you an example when I work for the government with the Big Four, what they do. Right? So this is what they're the ones been pressuring the government. A lot of these government flunkies end up in the Big Four. They employ them to gain work. So I would do with, I'd love to mention this Big Four, but I better not. That they would come in with the spear, come in and they'd say, we want to do this transition, it's going to cost $500,000, right? Okay. Then the spear's, the partner comes in, he sells it, right? So then you got then the A team comes in for the first few weeks, really good. Then generally local people, B or international experienced people. B team comes in, they do some of the slog work. C team comes in, they're all brought over on like temporary visas, and you've got to do the work for them. D team then comes in, they've come in tourist visas from the Philippines, etc. But the thing is, you're still paying for the A team. Yeah. Right? The government, the taxpayer pays for that. Then I saw an E team where they could barely speak English, and I had to write and populate all of the documents that they're generating in that. I believe there's an F team, right? So they want that their lobby is massive, like the Price Waterhouse, particularly Ernst & Young. And they want these people to come in because they make a mozza out of government, right? Government is the gold mine. That's how it works, right? So that skilled migration is an absolute certainty that they're going to solve some massive skills gap, right? It's always the case if you say, well, there's skilled migration, we want them in trades and apprentices and that. The very simple answer for there is invest in your youth for trades and skills. And it's actually cheaper, right? Cheaper and better to do that, right? And there's an elephant in the room. There's a political means of the ALP wanting a lot of people in here, right? So that's it. That's how it works. We've got power here in the massive.
Yeah, I have paid the bills. I just want you to know, but yes, I work from a government building, and they've been turning out the lights just occasionally to mix it up.
So that's it that's how skilled migration works right now. It's all going to be scammed and all types of things. Migration agents are going to be loving this because it costs now it costs $10,000 to $15,000 to bring someone in, and you've got to pay that. But people coming in from Asia don't mind paying 200 grand to get in, because they're well held. And you know, if you're aware of the amount that an international student from China has to pay, you would be absolutely astounded. Is anyone aware of that? It's towards $100,000 a year or more that they pay here. So it's a great industry. Again, like I'm actually all for as many.
But that's not an industry that's necessarily going to last forever, because of course China is smarter than paint, and China builds its own schools, its own universities. Not only that, they tailor make them within an inch of their lives. For example, when I visited mainland China, when I was president of the Law Institute of Victoria, I went to a university designed specifically to teach Chinese students about law in various countries, speaking the language of that country as they got their law degree in that specific targeted country-oriented area of law, which, you know, I'm not surprised to see them being that evolved in their thinking. So, you know, have we bitten the hand that feeds in that regard? Have we been asleep at the wheel, particularly in Victoria, in relation to overseas students?
No.
Is the premier of the Victoria going to China to organize this? I mean, like, we were talking about immigration, or we can't fix it, the cybersecurity in this country. We're being hacked left, right, and center. It's becoming new national sport. Are we talking about influx of 1 million people? Let me talk now from my point of view as a human intelligence expert. When you bring 1 million different characters, different people who are coming from different places, you're going to bring, you know, some good is going to come something bad, which Australia is not prepared to face. Are we bringing people from everywhere across the globe to go into this society? And as I say, Caroline, we have the students, you know, I mean, as John says, most of the students, you know, they don't want to talk, you know, they don't want to work, they don't want nothing. We're looking for the jobs. So jobs are not filled with the students still in Australia. So how are we going to, you know, integrate all these people coming across the globe in Australia and lift the economy when we have the problem with everything and anything we cannot fix right now in this country? The students are not coming in this country. I don't know where the statistics coming. If you go on an airport in Melbourne or in Sydney, you want to see daily arrival of 6 or 7 flights. So this is when you see the pre-COVID number of the flights, I think myself, where are these students coming from? Where are they? Because I don't see them in Sydney. I don't see that the buildings are full, that the universities are full. So like, I don't know, like maybe they're in different states, maybe not Victoria, maybe not in Sydney, New South Wales.
Yeah, we talked about that before in other programs. That, and I worked at the University of Sydney in helping them get a new campus in Western Sydney. So we talked about what the lockdown did. They had to go back, etc. And they're not coming back. There's been change in demographics, so more of them are going to Sydney and Brisbane, because word of mouth got out, and particularly with Indian students, they got absolutely blitzed with their degrees and fees because they had to leave in Victoria with the lockdowns.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a snapshot with the University of Sydney. So the fee income is about $6 billion, right? It's huge. And it's about 55-60% of income is fee income, whereas somewhere in the US, it's all research and other things. So the universities are massively reliant. And within that, there is a decrease of domestic students. They have to rely internationally. They've got no choice. What do they do with that money is the question. I had a really good insight. We're doing modelling over that. The University of Sydney, the majority of that actually goes to restoring your old buildings and building infrastructure. It does build research facilities, and the McCallum Cancer Institute's a few Aboriginal research buildings. So it does like asset research. That's where it floods out. Think about this. So all these hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of students, they might employ maybe a few thousand extra lecturers and administration type thing. And universities are good at technology, but that's where it all goes, right? The universities are feeding on themselves. Now, they tried all different types of things. If you go to Vietnam, you'll be in Saigon and you'll see RMIT building and this and that. So for a while, they tried to build their own universities, and that went, because as Caroline said, there's 21,000 universities in China.
Yeah.
Okay? So they don't need that. The other thing the Chinese did recently is stop online learning in the country, the foreign country, when you can do it domestically in China. So Mario's right that they're struggling to maintain that, but they're out on a limb and they've exhausted their reserve. They had hundreds of millions of dollars I saw in cash and reserves, or $1 billion in bonds and whatnot. They've had to eat into all of that. So they're the ones pressuring the government. Oh, let's have this. The Ernst & Young and Pricewaterhouse, I need more people here. We've got no one locally skill-wise, right? All of those A, B, C, D, E, F teams means that all local peoples don't get hired. Bang. Then all of the IT industry, you can churn out IT workers. They're not going to get hired locally, right? When I can hire someone that's not going to complain on $300 a day, right?
This is what John is trying to say, like, Australians continuously driving economy same way they drive the 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The things that change, and I don't see that anybody does this risk analysis, or potential, a new outbreak, right? Yesterday we have in Sydney outbreak of the measles. It's just, imagine now have the thousands of students coming again in the country and again being in lockdowns and everything else. We're talking about Australian citizens, we're talking about foreign citizens.
Mario, we're missing bits of what you're saying, unfortunately. So, but we get the gist. We get the gist.
Yeah. So it's like, we, as I said, John says, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Chinese students want to come here because they want to go overseas. And 1 million people, I'll say again, I think it's going to cause the havoc, as John says. If you don't hire the local people, you hire people from overseas, what service you're going to expect? And it's going to, of course, going to be bigger gap between the domestic populace and the foreign body.
Ruben.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. I think I can add something to this as a current student in an Australian uni. It has been an interesting experience with COVID because I began my studies in 2019, just before everything fell apart. And I've seen the impact and decline in my university as foreign students dried up. And it was pretty plain and obvious to everybody that as an organisation, they had not planned for and had not anticipated such a shock to their system. And yet, if we think about it, it wouldn't take much of a crisis at all to destroy that source of income, be it that there's some kind of conflict, there's some kind of travel restriction, pandemics, any number of reasons could cause a major upset to those student numbers. And they were not prepared. They were not able to really absorb that kind of a lockdown for that period of time. They were really, really dependent on particularly Chinese students, but international students in general. And the consequence has been massive layoffs, staff shortages, and difficulties for other students who have continued with their studies because now there are not enough staff hours to go around to provide the same level of service that existed only a couple of years before. So we're all feeling it. And I look at it as really being a risk management issue. This was not anticipated, it was not prepared for, and yet you could see it coming from a mile off.
Yeah, Ruben's absolutely right. Was when I used to sit with the CFO at Sydney Uni and the board, the provost, etc., and we looked at these numbers. I actually said, they use sensitivity analysis, right? And it showed if it dropped 5%, they'd be in. Well, the financial impacts would be massive. And I said, if that goes to 10% or 20, you're screwed. I went, oh. No, it's not going to happen. Right? So there's no contingency. That's actually what Ruben said. That's what's happened. Right?
That's arrogance and hubris. That's all.
They had
incompetence, dare I say?
Exactly. Well, they're skilled people. There's no doubt about that. But that it can't happen here. I mean, that's manifested itself in the Australian property market. People go, it can never go. You hear this, Carolyn? It can never go down. It can never go down, and it can never be a pandemic, and that's also endemic to Australia. There's planning in Australia for infrastructure, especially, is very, very short term. Right, the ability is here to build long-term infrastructure, but it's unlike any country in the world that has a master plan to build this. You'll see this in Vietnam. You'll see there's subway constructions. You'll see the freeways. The roads are immaculate. I used to work with road builders in Vietnam, and then they turned up in the Solomon Islands. Right here, like again, I'm living in a town where you can barely drive from one town to the other. And I was in Echuca last week, and I went across the border to New South Wales, and it was a bit better where they planned long stretches of roads. Here they've got a few mobile pothole units filling in gaps in road. I have not, all credit to the Solomon Islands and Vietnam, but I've never seen anything worse anywhere in the world than what I see here for infrastructure. And that's only in the roads. That manifests itself in everywhere. So the incompetence of running infrastructure here now, in Victoria especially, we cannot cope for these people.
Yeah, and we've had opportunities along the way to improve infrastructure. We've been fat in terms of money balances as governments, both state and federally, but we haven't invested. We haven't actually thought. You're right, it's short-term thinking, and we now live with the legacy of that. But it's okay, because in Melbourne CBD, what we've done is we've got rid of the roads and everybody's going to be on a scooter. So we're going to solve the problem, because we're going to have a mobile population. We're all going to be on Scooterville. It's going to be beautiful. So, John, I don't know what you're worried about. I mean, for us, so what it means, what it translates to in terms of having highways that don't function is time, and time is still money. So the fact that we're slowing everything down, we're going backwards financially simply because of poor infrastructure, that is appalling. You're starting to see a society, if you will, fall apart from infrastructure up.
And that's a good point, Caroline. If infrastructure doesn't functioning, nothing else is functioning in this country. And I like, I don't understand that Australia tried to maintain this image and evolved as a great advanced country and everything else. But yesterday, for example, I heard that a Labor Prime Minister announced that we're going to have the biggest upgrade of manufacturing in Australia, and I'm like, this is for real? Like, why Australia doesn't have manufacturing in the first place? And then what they're going to manufacture is solar, solar panels. I'm like, right. So the submarines in 10 years, solar panels. But as I said, John, potholes. You should see Sydney how the potholes looks like. It's a dangerous to drive. And the same thing, we are going to drive the scooters. So imagine all these foreign people come in Australia dreaming about some different life and say like, okay, we're now gonna drive the scooters and we can't move nowhere because the infrastructure is bad. And that's gonna put us backwards, Caroline. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, these road builders that I've said in Vietnam and Solomon Islands, they operate in a monsoon. So maybe if they come here, it's a good thing, because we have a bit of heavy rainfall, and the next thing you've got trench warfare on the freeways. So maybe that might be a good outcome there.
Look, maybe that's the reason why the Daniel Andrews went into China, and that's a one thing I'm trying to pick it up. Obviously, he's gone so quickly in a rush because he's going to bring a lot of goodies, a lot of people who can work on monsoons, on rain, the lower pays and everything else. Maybe that's the actually reason for his trip.
Ruben, final thoughts.
On the infrastructure side of things, it's interesting that you mentioned computers. I see a trend here leaning towards the 15-minute city agenda. See that starting to become an interest locally. But my reading of it is, rather than necessarily anything that's strictly in the best interest of the environment, it's actually a way of trying to minimize the need for infrastructure investment. By reducing the amount of vehicle traffic, you therefore reduce the need for investment. So that's an ongoing issue. But I think the issue is going to be that over the next 12 months, Australia's going to start to feel the pressure of this non-stop immigration. We're going to see lots of anxiety and concern, and we're going to see people who favour this agenda easily dismissing everybody else as somehow being prejudiced, somehow being racist or xenophobic. And that's utterly missing the point. So it's going to cause a lot of rift in the Australian political scene. And I don't think that's good for the country as a whole. I think we're all going to suffer as a result of this.
I think that's right. And Victoria Infrastructure Report was released this week saying, it's okay, everybody, stay calm. We're going to go up instead of out. So we're just going to commandeer your suburban house, your suburban block, your lifestyle. We actually really can't afford that lifestyle anymore. So, and it's fascinating because it's the parents of the people I'm now employing who were migrants are saying, if I'd known now what's going to happen to me here in this country, I can see things are actually better and improving where I came from. Why did I come here?
Yep.
And they were the words of a Vietnamese parent. And they've just recently gone back to Vietnam. So I'm finding, John, and my trip to Vietnam, that's going to be absolutely fascinating, just to be able to do that compare and contrast in terms of what can they achieve with will, with population, with application, as opposed to what we are no longer achieving, what we're no longer maintaining. The rot has started. Is it going to get worse, or can we reverse this? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the Inform this week, and I'm looking forward to next week.